Good morning again. I pray all of you are having a good week and enjoying the time that you're in this season of great expectation. Yes, it's turmoil and everything, but it's also great expectation of what the Lord is doing in the earth. I sense that what I have to share hopefully will help you process some things. The Lord has been continuing to bring up different patriarchs in the scriptures as to kind of help me process things, and even this morning as I got ready to come up to do this video, I received a text from someone, which I will explain in a little bit, was total affirmation to me personally that I am on track. I want to bring up a particular person in the Bible who is an outstanding individual, and it's Samuel. We can't underestimate what God is doing in our lives, nor what He has planned for us into generations leading up to our birth, and then the generations that will follow our birth. We may think in a finite situation that our life doesn't count much, but our decisions that we make and the things that we say are recorded in history, and we have no idea how far our voice will go or who it will influence to either serve the Lord or not serve the Lord. It is critical that we understand that when God made man, He gave us choice, which we've talked about. He gave us opportunity to either bless or curse. And so let's look at this story with Samuel and see what his choices and the obstacles he faced and what he did with them, and how God moved in his life and used him to affect great high-profile people in many ways. So we're going to start with the first chapter of Samuel with Elkanah and his wife Hannah, which he had two wives, and one of his wives had children and Hannah did not. And we know the story that she was barren. And I started really looking at that point, that it starts off with barrenness. The book of Samuel starts off with barrenness. And then I began to think, oh my goodness, there were other very influential people who were born where the mother really just struggled very much with barrenness. And what is God doing with that? Let's think about it just, through the main patriarchs, which would be Sarah, the wife of Abraham, was barren. She later gave birth to Isaac, which was a direct descendant of Jesus. And then Isaac's wife, when he married, she was barren. For 3 generations this happened. And then whenever Jacob got married to Rachel, she was barren. So we had 3 situations of the 3 generations of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that each one of their wives were barren. Now Jacob's wife, which Judah was born from, was not, but Rachel was. So what is the purpose of barrenness, and what should we do in that situation? How do we process the fact of barrenness? And I mean, all of us have gone through dry places. Even Jesus, whenever he was called began to move in his ministry, he went through the desert where Satan tempted him. So in the barrenness in times, and in some ways we are going through a kind of a dry season, we should learn to embrace that time and understand that God is building in us character, purpose, and destiny. Don't forget that word. And one of my favorite chapters, which obviously I like the book of Isaiah, but Isaiah 54 discusses that. And it says in Isaiah 54, some of you may know it, it says, "Sing, O barren one who did not bear, break forth into singing and cry aloud, you have not been in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than the children of her who is married, says the Lord. Enlarge the place of your tents, and let your curtains and your habitations be stretched out. Do not hide back, strengthen your cords, and strengthen your stakes. For you will spread abroad to the right and to the left, and your offering will possess the nations, and will the people of the desolate cities." So we understand that God does work through barrenness. And what happens in the story of Samuel, how actually Samuel was conceived, is when Hannah went with Elkanah to the temple, and her grief and her barrenness was so great that she was actually basically travailing, And Eli thought that she was drunk because she was so grieved and stricken that she was just pouring out her soul to the Lord. And Eli comes up and he kind of, corrects her or rebukes her for coming to the temple and, being a little tipsy. But that wasn't the case. And she said, "No, my Lord, that's not what's happening." She said, I'm grieved in my spirit because I have not had child. And Eli did pray for her in due time that God would grant her prayer. And she did conceive, and she had a child, and she named him Samuel, which means I've asked for him from the Lord. Now, Hannah, once she had Samuel, she waited a little bit, and but it says after she weaned him, she went to the house of the Lord. And she goes to Eli, and I mean, can you imagine Eli probably forgot about this. He probably seen so much other situations, but I'm sure he remembered it. And he said, she said, "Look, God granted my petition." Look at, she was probably showing Samuel to her, saying, "Look how God honored my prayer and even your prayer and joining with me that I would conceive and have a child." And so, it says, I had always pictured him being probably about 6 or 7 years old, but it says right after he was weaned, she comes and takes him to the temple. Now, you can wonder what he had to adjust to, because there were probably just mainly men in the temple. So him to sit down and, eat breakfast with Eli and his sons, or, helping him brush his teeth. I mean, all these practical things of him taking his bath and all that. So Samuel may have even, we don't know, he may have been raised by these men to, because they were in the temple. We don't know exactly how he was raised, but I'm sure it was a very difficult time for him as a little boy. I mean, a little tiny, maybe even a toddler. We don't know exactly how old, but it does say in 1 Samuel 2:19 that his mother used to make for him, it says, a little robe. I thought it was very cool because I'd read it, before, but God would show me some stuff about a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. So here Hannah comes in, and you often see a mother get down on her knees and begin to look up into the eyes of a child and say, "I love you, you're so special," holding them dear. These children need that kind of affirmation and love from their mothers. And I'm sure Hannah, had to really struggle. And I'm sure she prayed for Samuel every day, saying, "God, he's yours. You gave him to me, but I give him back to you to be used of you." So what was God doing in this picture? What was he doing in Samuel that he had been given to him? I'm sure that the Lord was close to him and in his presence. I mean, even in the near future, we hear that he did begin to hear things from the Lord, and we can talk about in a few minutes. But it says in Samuel 2:26, "Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with men." And we'll see that same phrase if you read closely in the book of Samuel. It says, "And Samuel grew, and Samuel grew, and Samuel grew." Well, you think about that little robe, and every year the mother's coming back and giving him a bigger robe and a bigger robe and a bigger robe. And she may visit him, throughout her whole life and gave him a new robe, every year. Who knows? It doesn't say that she stopped once he became a man. But this mother, because of her barrenness, because of the things she went through, she had to have another level of value for Samuel. So what was in the condition in the temple, though? You think about him, a little boy in the temple, sitting there and or praying at night, or no telling what his duties were, but he had to be aware that things were wrong. Obviously we know about how the sons would take the better part of the sacrifices, and they were very selfish and thought about that, and they were actually even doing immoral acts at the temple. And so, I mean, Samuel at this age had to be aware of, that's a lot to process as a child. Like, there's darkness and light even in God's temple. And so what we hear later is, as Samuel's probably trying to process it, God sends a man of God to the situation, to Eli. And this morning when I got up, I've been processing this about Samuel. And a friend of mine in Barbados, her name is Cora, she actually sends me kind of a devotion every morning. Well, I get up this morning, and sure enough, she gives this word that the man of God gave to Eli in her little thing. And it says, it's 1 Samuel 2:29 and 30. Why do you scorn my sacrifice? Now, this man of God is directly confronting Eli about the sin in the temple. Why do you scorn my sacrifice and offering that I prescribe for my dwelling? Why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by my people Israel? Therefore, here it is, people bringing a sacrifice to the Lord, and these priests taking it for themselves. I mean, that's pretty serious. Therefore, the Lord God of Israel declares, I promised that the members of your family would minister before me forever. But now, the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me, I will honor, but those who despise me shall be treated with contempt. So Samuel is caught up, probably, I don't know if he would witness hearing this discussion between this man of God and Eli, but I'm sure he had to be aware of it. And then, after this episode comes in with the priest, then it says, now Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. And then it says, Eli, his eyesight began to go bad, and the lamp of God had not gone out. And Samuel was lying down in the temple where the ark of God was. When I read that part, I'd never really thought about it, but David was a tremendous worshiper, and Samuel was aware of the presence of God with the ark. So, he could have been very instrumental in David in his worship, and because David was very hungry for the presence of God, and it could have been really a lot out of the influence of Samuel introducing him to more about being in the presence of God. And so eventually, even though as maybe Samuel hadn't really learned to hear the voice, God began to train him to be a prophet, really, because he was later a little bit older, but he thought that he had laid down, and there he was in the temple, and then he heard a voice, and he thought it was Eli, and he goes to Eli, and Eli says, well, he does it 2 or 3 times, and Eli says, no, it's God speaking to you. And then God begins to talk to Samuel directly about these adults. And so whenever he gets up, he doesn't go in. It says he opens up the doors of the temple and does his regular everyday duty, but Eli wants him to tell him what the Lord told him, which he said he told him everything. So he, as a child, tells these adults, he's telling Eli, the priest, the guy who's supposed to be the man of God, he's telling him what God's going to do. And strength had to come into Samuel. And again, it repeats again in verse 19. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with them, and let none of his words fall to the ground. So God really began to realize that Samuel was making a choice to give his life surrendered to him. Therefore, he became a very powerful man. And as he grew, later we know that he anointed kings. He anointed Saul, he anointed David, but he also executed a king when Saul did not obey and destroy the Abimelechs. He killed the king. So Samuel was a very, very mighty man, and I can't help but to think of his path, and even as before his birth, his mother going through barrenness and the difficulty, but he had the strength, even as a child, to speak the word of the Lord, even as he grew up, to go out and really do things in faith for the Lord. And he didn't have these stories that we have. We have stories to reflect on and see how these people did things before us, but they didn't have that because they were the pioneering people. And I think we're coming to a day that right now that God is looking for people who are willing to really go out for Him, go all out. I mean, do things that are beyond maybe somebody else says. We always go, well, who's going to go first? Who's going to go first? I mean, we might be standing in a situation and saying, somebody needs to say something. Somebody needs to say something. Well, who is it going to be? I mean, who is the one who's going to say, enough's enough? Or who is the one that's going to be able to say, I'm not going to join into this party because it's going in the wrong direction? I mean, we know the story of the salmon. He always has to swim upstream to reproduce. I mean, we have to be willing to go upstream against the grain, but understand and hear the word of the Lord and be able to proclaim that word in season and due season. So I ask you to, take heart today and realize that, we do wear a robe of righteousness. We need to realize that we're covered personally. We weren't just called to be the voice of the Lord. We were called to be in His presence and to enjoy Him and to love Him, for Him to enjoy us. But the days are coming that we are going to need to speak up. We're going to need to probably do things that are uncomfortable. But if we understand who we are and what God is doing in the earth, I think it will give us great courage and the boldness that we need. So spend time with the Lord if you can. Just be in His presence and understand His love and His purpose, and that He's working in us. Even in the situation that's going on right now on the earth, we know that great days are ahead. So love and blessings. I'm praying for you guys. If you want to send me a comment or whatever, that's great. I appreciate it. Love you. And eventually I will be updating you more where I'm headed in the future. But still, things are unfolding for me. Obviously, all the things that have happened has been a huge upset. But it's okay. It's really okay, because I know God's at work in me and you. Love y'all. Bye.